Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you will find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by 35,815 people from 160 countries and is supported by 509 organisations. We have over 100 volunteer activists, including many country contacts, engaged in defending women's rights. And so do join us as a volunteer if you have not already. Today, we have Carol Hunter from Wicklow Women for Women, Ireland. She's going to give an update on Ireland. Barbara Bull from Japan, an update on Japan, a weakened LGBT bill presented to the Diet before the G7 summit. Then we have Shono Yoriko, Japan, which is a pre-recorded video about how it's from Shono, cancel culture in Japan afflicts the novelist Shono Yoriko. Then we're going to have a small talk about the situation, about the video and about the situation in Japan from our country contact for Japan, Uno Ishigami. So I'm really pleased now to go to our first panelist. That's Carol Hunter from Wicklow Women for Women from Ireland. She's going to give a talk, and her bio says that she is part of Wicklow Women for Women, one of the biggest groups defending women's sex-based rights, presumably in Ireland, but maybe soon the world. But over to you, Carol. It's a pleasure having you on.
All right, thank you. It's really rather hopeful about us being even the biggest in Ireland, which we are by no means are, but still working hard. So you probably all know that Ireland is touted as the poster child for gender recognition and self-identification. Countries point to us as somewhere self-ID has been in place for several years with no downside, no adverse consequences. The truth is that we are, in fact, the poster child for the Denton's Report playbook. And we are now a sort of petri dish for other countries to see how thoroughly gender ideology can be embedded in legal systems and be positioned as normal without any objections. First, a bit of background, because I find that people aren't terribly sure about Ireland, apart from St. Patrick and leprechauns. We are a country of 5.1 million people with a median age of 38.2 years, so a fairly young population. Due to inward immigration, our population has grown 10% in 10 years, which is another thing that causes a bit of societal change. So that's relevant to all of this, I think. We've been a member of the EU since 1973 and always strive to be the good child in implementing EU legislation. Our government is basically centre-right, and because of our system of proportional representation, we normally end up with a coalition government. At the moment, we have a coalition of our two main centrist parties and the Greens, and the presence of the Greens is very important. For most of our history, we have been a deeply Catholic country, but in the last 20 years, the various church scandals have meant that most people now consider themselves only nominally Catholic. This has left an ethical vacuum, which gender ideology has been quick to colonize, aided by Irish people's desire to be seen as forward-thinking and on message. Of course, the Denton Report advised that legislation be quietly latched onto more popular legal reforms, and in 2015, we had the ideal situation with the referendum on marriage equality, which had enormous public support. Under the radar, the Gender Recognition Act was passed at the same time in the Dáil, our parliament, with no public discussion and no public awareness. Denton's itself states that in Ireland, activists have directly lobbied individual politicians and tried to keep press coverage to a minimum. They've succeeded in that. These activists, primarily the Transgender Equality Network Ireland, TENI, had been working for some years prior to 2015, and by 2015 basically owned the narrative. So overall, the Denton strategy has been hugely successful here. Our politicians were perhaps already softened up by the fact that our former president, Mary Robinson, was a signatory on Yogyakarta, and we have 180 pharmaceutical companies manufacturing in Ireland. So a small island with 180 pharmaceutical companies. We keep on their right side. The Gender Recognition Act allows all individuals over the age of 18 to self-declare their own gender identity. They simply fill in a form, have it witnessed, and send it off. There is no charge. The 16 to 18-year-olds can apply through the courts with a medical declaration and parental consent. Most people have no idea either that the bill exists or that the process is so open. With our government so firmly captured by 2015, they have been able to move forward with legislation to embed gender ideology into the heart of our institutions. Our universities, National Women's Council, Amnesty Ireland, the trades unions, business representative groups, etc., have all been captured. We know we're no different from the rest of the world in this, but in a small country, it makes a difference. To give more context, among the aspirant politicians that the activist groups appear to have targeted early on was a young Green called Roderick O'Gorman. Since 2020, he has been a minister in the present coalition in charge of the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, which covers just about everything, obviously, and makes him pivotal in driving gender ideology forwards. He is fully committed to gender ideology and so is pushing to have the legal age for gender recognition reduced to below the age of 16 and for removing the current need for parental consent for 16 to 18-year-olds. In 2018, the government appointed a review group to revisit the 2015 GRA, and this review called for a gender recognition system for any age with parental consent. This review group was chaired by the executive director of Belong To, a youth transgender activist group, with members including a man called Sarah Phillips, who was then on the board of TENI and is now on the board of our National Women's Council. The Ombudsman for Children supports this position. This is legislation waiting to happen, but for the moment remains on the back burner. We do, however, now have several major pieces of legislation either going through or soon to be going through our Dáil, which will between them build a legal framework around gender ideology, which will make it very hard to combat. I'll go into that in a minute, but first want to run very quickly through the position more generally. Prisons. We have 3 transgender males in Limerick Prison, which is our main women's prison, holding 48 women at the moment in very overcrowded conditions. All 3 men are guilty of violent sexual assaults. Although they're kept on a different landing to the women, apparently they shout abuse at the women below. They're kept locked up for 23 hours a day, so that's another human rights violation right there. One man is a 21-year-old called Barbie Kardashian, who is so extremely violent and frankly so weird looking that the general public have become aware of him, which is of course a good thing because nobody wants Barbie Kardashian in a woman's prison. Even the prison guards don't want him there. In sports, Gulf Ireland has from March this year adopted a policy of allowing males to participate in female competition under a number of very vague constraints. Our Ladies Gaelic Football Association is also allowing boys between 12 to 15 into girls' teams with a medical statement, and 16-year-olds and older can play on ladies' teams with a gender recognition certificate. They should have testosterone levels of no more than 10 nanomoles per liter in the previous 12 months, but there's no independent testing of that, so that can just go by the board. Gaelic football is a rough contact sport, very like Aussie rules, for example. A non-binary category has just been added to the Dublin Marathon, and Swim Ireland is discussing how to make swimming more inclusive. Our health service, called the HSE. Without going into detail, our health service works closely with various activist groups and, as in other jurisdictions, is pushing forward gender-neutral language, mixed-sex wards, etc., etc. Our gender identity service for children under 18 feeds into the Tavistock, so is currently at a standstill. The adult clinic is becoming more outspoken in its opposition to automatic affirmation, but is largely ignored. And we have heard the beginnings of a whisper that the activist groups are going to target our TDs, that's members of parliament here, with a view to allowing the Webberleys, for example, to practice in Ireland. So that's just very much a whisper. Working with various LGBT plus lobby groups, the Health Service has produced much of the material authorized for use in the new school curriculum. In education, a new social, personal and health education, that's SPHE curriculum, is being rolled out. The new junior cycle for ages 12 to 16 will start in September, the senior cycle next year, and the primary cycle in 2025. Gender ideology is taught as fact from kinder level up, Garten level onwards, and is embedded in all subjects, even biology. Even the approach to mathematics and everything like that will be much more in line with the critical theory approach. In line with Denton's, all teachers will be re-educated. Belong To is very active already in schools. It goes in and teaches them, and it teaches them stuff which isn't basically the law, but they believe it. So this is a real problem. A lot of teachers are very unhappy. Under the Irish Constitution, parents are the primary educators of their children, but this new approach makes it impossible for them to remove children from those classes they deem unsuitable. So back to the legislation lined up at the moment. Firstly, the Criminal Justice Incitement to Violence or Hatred and Hate Offences Bill 2022. This is in effect an attack on freedom of speech. Article 40.6.1 of our Constitution protects free speech already, with the exception of speech which threatens public order. And for this reason, we have the 1989 Prohibition of Incitement to Hatred Act. The new bill actually seeks to repeal this 1989 Act without saying so, by placing limits around free speech to protect certain disadvantaged groups, such as travelers and immigrants, but crucially transgender people and non-gender conforming people. Thus, the new bill makes gender a protected characteristic, but not sex. Gender is defined as the gender of a person, or the gender which a person expresses as the person's preferred gender, or with which the person identifies, and includes transgender and a gender other than those of male and female. In other words, a completely nonsensical circular definition of gender. There is, in addition, no definition of hatred, which appears to lie solely in the ear or eye of the beholder. The sources of hatred could include words, pictures, videos, anything really either shared or private. This talk, for example, could easily be deemed hate. This bill makes you guilty until proven innocent. Even the newspaper Saudi Express reported the bill as extreme, as did Donald Trump Jr. and Elon Musk as well, I think. If a person is accused of hatred, the police can decide whether or not to investigate, but the police are also captured. So, that's probably a foregone conclusion. The police can then seize phones, laptops, etc. to decide whether to prosecute, and there's a maximum prison sentence of 5 years. This bill passed easily through the Dáil. Only 4 TDs turned up for the debate and is currently passing through the Senate. A few politicians have raised objections, but not many. Luckily, I think the bill will be completely unworkable in practice. We'll all put on our adult human t-shirt, female t-shirts, and see how they cope with that. Just they won't know what to do. Then the next one, the Irish Constitution sets out the rights of Irish citizens, and rights contained therein can only be amended through a citizens' referendum. The government has announced that it will hold such a referendum in November this year on gender equality. Mind you, they've also just announced that they might hold a general election in November. So whether they intend to do the referendum very quietly alongside that or not, I really don't know. This referendum was recommended originally by the Citizens' Assembly with input from TENI, etc., and subsequently by a special joint Oireachtas, that's our Parliament Committee on Gender Equality. Proposals for the constitutional amendments will be published at the end of June. The government statement is, for too long, women and girls have carried a disproportionate share of responsibilities, been discriminated against, objectified, and lived in fear of domestic violence. Which sounds great, you know, they're going to tackle all of that. But actually, it's closely followed by the plan to amend all sex-specific language in the Constitution to enshrine gender equality. Article 40.1 of our Constitution states, all citizens shall, as human persons, be held equal before the law. This shall not be held to mean that the state shall not in its enactments have due regard to differences of capacity, physical and moral, and of social function. It is proposed that this should be amended to refer explicitly to gender equality and non-discrimination. When things are in our Constitution, they become very difficult to move and obviously very embedded. Another article, 41.2, states, in particular, the state recognizes that by her life within the home, woman gives to the state a support without which the common good cannot be achieved. This article has long been contentious for feminists, as it was widely interpreted as keeping women out of the workplace. But it's now being reassessed as recognizing the value of women who choose to stay at home. Again, the word woman will be replaced by non-gender specific terminology, whereas they could simply add the word man to this. All citizens equal before the law is surely sufficient, unless the underlying intention is in fact to embed gender identity rather than sex into the Constitution. They promised a public consultation for submissions on this and announced it out of the blue and then said we had 24 hours in which to get in touch with our TDs. And so we scrambled like mad to try and get emails in, but 24 hours is not long for a proper consultation process. However, as this is a referendum vote, it cannot be passed behind closed doors, so could well be the best opportunity we will have for challenging gender ideology in the full glare of sunlight. Then we have the Conversion Therapy Act. The Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, under the aforementioned Roderick O'Gorman, requested a tender for conversion therapy research in November 2021, intended to help inform the policy rationale for and development of a cross-governmental approach to dealing with conversion practices in Ireland, including the development of legislation if required. Prior to setting this up, O'Gorman had already said that this practice is abusive and causes significant harms to people already in distress. Now, I should point out that there have been no recorded cases of conversion therapy in Ireland for at least 20 years, and we know that Roderick O'Gorman is perfectly aware of this. Nonetheless, the department appointed a research advisory group with representatives from advocacy groups, but no individuals or groups with other viewpoints. So completely bought before it began. The advocacy groups co-signed a public letter before the process had begun even, stating their firm commitment to a fully LGBT+ inclusive ban. The result was set to be a foregone conclusion. The research report, which was put together by our Trinity College School of Nursing and Midwifery and released in February of this year, again, does not define conversion therapy, nor does it provide any corroborating evidence, address clinical concerns, differentiate between sexual orientation and gender identity, provides no evidence of any sort but this will be the recommendation behind this, the wording on this bill. A week ago, Roderick O'Gorman went to a conference organised by TENI and LGBT plus Ireland, and immediately afterwards announced that he would be bringing a conversion therapy bill to the Dáil this June. This appears to be a solo flight, as when asked about this, people working in the department said they knew absolutely nothing about it. In a small country, you can get in touch with people like that and just ask them. So, okay, we've got all of this coming at us. What are we doing about it? Although the few opinion polls carried out about gender ideology and the loss of women's rights show that most people are firmly opposed to the whole idea, organised opposition is still very scattered. Most people either don't know anything about it or just don't want to put their head above the parapet. Although there are small groups like Women's Space Ireland and Irish Women's Lobby, these have mainly had an online presence. The highest profile and best organised group working in this area is the Countess under Leisha de Bruin. The various working groups under its aegis do invaluable work at policy level, contacting TDs and department heads and in coordinating letter writing campaigns. However, because of the complete blanket loss of mainstream media coverage, apart from a few journalists who do speak out, these campaigns are largely invisible, and those women at grassroots level who would like to do something often feel totally isolated and fear to speak out. All is not lost, as things are beginning to change. If any of you saw videos from Billboard Chris's recent visit to Dublin, you will have seen that ordinary people are much better informed than is apparent from the media. We know that many TDs are in fact very dubious about the direction in which legislation is headed, but they won't do anything until public opinion threatens their seats. Last November, the Women's Space to Speak conference was held in Dublin, and 200 women from all over the country came together. For the first time, there was a sense of energy and community of purpose. We started to network. The small group I belonged to, Wicklow Women for Women, met randomly there in the bar and discovered we all lived near each other. We held our first local public meeting in January with Stella O'Malley, who has spoken on here, a speaker from the Countess, and a lesbian talking of how gender ideology has affected her. From there, we started to build a grassroots online network. For the last few weeks, a small group has held a silenced protest about men in women's jails and have been really pleased with the degree of public support from passers-by. Politicians from some of the minor parties are engaging with the protesters in support of our message. So at a national level, we are feeling more hopeful that the tide is turning. We expect that when parents see the material on the SPHE curriculum starting in September, opposition will become much more visible. Perhaps the most important event to happen in Ireland, though, and one which will have a global impact, was the first GenSpect conference at the end of April, timed to coincide with this year's EPATH. That's the European branch of WPATH. It was held less than 2 kilometers away from the EPATH conference. GenSpect was founded in 2021 by the Irish psychotherapist Stella O'Malley as an extension of her practice in treating both young people suffering with gender distress and their families. This led her to the treatment of detransitioners. GenSpect as an organization is now positioning itself as a therapeutic alternative to the treatment of the medicalization model of WPATH. Their therapeutic model is predicated on providing a healthy approach to sex and gender by helping young people with profound gender distress to journey through puberty. The best cure for puberty is puberty. The conference had about 250 attendees from across the world, with expert speakers from a number of disciplines, from Michael Biggs, the sociologist who exposed the Tavistock, Helen Joyce, Maya Forstatter, Joseph Burgo, Lisa Littman, Stephanie Davies-Arai of Transgender Trend, Sue Evans of the Tavistock, as well as a number of detransitioners and parents. It was inspirational, and filled with love. So that's how things stand at the moment. Our next battle is preparing for the gender equality referendum. And that's how we stand nationally at the moment.
How long have you been organising as Wicklow Women for Women? And how easy was it to sort of link up with other people, well, other women?
Well, we met in November at the Women's Space to Speak conference, very randomly. As I say, we were sitting near each other in the bar and just started talking afterwards, and then discovered we were going home the same way. So sat on the train going home, which is about a 30-minute journey or something like that, and discovered that we had a fairly activist turn of mind, I guess, and we thought we've got to do something about this. We can't just moan among ourselves and things. We've got to do something. So we organized to get together, which we did. There are 7 of us, and some of them are on, I can see on here. So hello. And we decided the best thing to do was to have a public meeting, and none of us had the faintest notion what we were doing. And so this was basically coming into December, and we had Christmas in the middle, and we decided just to go for January. We would hire a room in the local hotel. We would figure out some sort of speakers and just go for it. So we tried our luck. We got in touch with Stella O'Malley and said, would she come and talk to us about problems with the curriculum? We decided to talk about the curriculum because we thought that way that would be something that local people might actually be interested in, rather than some of the more obscure stuff about women's rights. And so Stella said she would come, and then speaker from the Countess, who knows all about the curriculum and all the various stuff that's been going on behind the board there. And we just waited to see if anybody would turn up. We didn't really give out much publicity because we were really quite frightened that people might shoot us or something like that, because it is very woke around here. But one of our members got in touch with all the local politicians, all the local councillors, and much to our surprise, they did turn up. Loads of teachers turned up. And whereas we had thought nobody will come, we'll just go to the bar and drink our misery away. But no, we had about 60 people, all of whom were very engaged and got very fired up. So it was the beginning of being able to take names and get interested at grassroots level, because at grassroots level, I think, is where this will happen eventually in Ireland. And so we have to get those people who feel isolated, abandoned by everybody, and get those into some sort of talking. So now I have quite a lot of names around the country. I send emails. We have had at least one Zoom meeting. We must have some more.
We're going to now hear from Barbara Bulk, who is an American living in Japan. She's an ESL, which I think is English as a foreign language, teacher in Kobe. Her activism has been limited to being a donor of WDI or other gender critical things and commenting on Twitter. She's going to cover some of the LGBT groups in Tokyo and gender critical groups, and pressure on the ruling party before the G7 summit, and some of what's going on in the Diet in the Parliament. So thank you so much, Barbara, and over to you.
This is an update from Japan. I'm going to start first with LGBT groups. So LGBT activism has flourished in Japan for the last 20 years. The first Pride Parade was in 1994, and the Pride House was established in 2010. The Pride House in Tokyo is a consortium of 35 organizations, 15 sponsor corporations, and 20 embassies. There's a building in Shinjuku Ward with a meeting space, a library, and a cafe. This is in the middle of Tokyo. It's the Pride House, and you can see it's on the 2nd floor. And then on the right, you can see the inside, which is extensive. It's a lot of space. It's a meeting room, there's a cafe, and then a library. Looks very nice, and I would imagine it's extremely expensive. So some of those sponsor companies are probably helping them. Okay, so the organizations in their consortium, the missions include running the Pride Parade, which is in April, a film festival, serving those with HIV, activism with sports and the Olympics. Every time the Olympics comes around, there's a lot of LGBT activism, training for companies regarding LGBT, helping LGBT families, LGBT families, education about gender diversity, and more. Last year, a second Pride Center was established in Osaka by Nichi-Ito Diversity. Nichi-Ito means rainbow, rainbow diversity. And this is, again, an organization in the Tokyo Consortium. The founder and director of Rainbow Diversity is a lesbian named Maki Muraki. She's a self-made woman, very successful, a lawyer and consultant, and she set up her organization in 2013, Nichi-Ito Diversity. The purpose of this organization was to help other gay people, lesbians, bisexuals in the workforce. In Japan, it's pretty rough working. It's long hours. There's a lot of harassment sometimes and bullying. So that was her objective, was to stop that. And because of her, they have made a lot of policies to prevent that. So she has made progress. I think transgender also goes along with that. She says that the LGBT, the percentage in Japan is about 5%, which usually it's 10%. So I believe a lot of people have not come out yet. Because, let me see. However, she uses cis, she uses pronouns. Also, I saw a TED talk that she did, and it's obvious she doesn't know about sports science. She thinks that men and women can compete together and it's perfectly fair. As the G7 was approaching, I opened up the newspaper, the Japanese newspaper we have, and here is a big picture with Ms. Muraki and a French embassy official at the Pride Center in Osaka. Each was holding a transgender flag. It became apparent to me that the press is also woke. I admire some things about Ms. Muraki, but like those in the West, she refuses to see a big part of the picture. Pride Center Osaka is run by Queer Women's Research Center. And not only that, it has a gender-neutral bathroom. The two Pride Centers have strong ties with foreign diplomats. So the next thing is the gender critical group, which is called Save Women's Space, Japan. It's a women's symbol with a bunch of leaves around it. And I wondered about the significance of those leaves. And I contacted them, but they said there was nothing in particular about the leaves. But it is a beautiful logo. And their purpose is they have regular meetings with politicians, Zoom presentations, and press conferences. Their objective is to point out the harm of gender self-identity to politicians regarding the Japanese public and to support women's spaces and rights. On May 1st, Save Women's Spaces had a press conference at Japan National Press Club. One of the speakers, Natsuko Mori, told of the trouble the lesbian community has faced from males who identify as lesbians. Another speaker, well, they had a press conference and it was a very long table. They had about 7 speakers. And Michiko Orita was the other one, this other speaker. She is from Tokyo's Rape Crisis Center, which is a consultation center. And she said that her center had been disqualified for a government grant from the Minato City Center for Gender Equality. The director of the center was displeased that she had used the terms trans women instead of women in the Rape Center's newsletter. We can now see how things are set up here to favor trans activists. It seems that the government gives funds to Minato City Center for gender equality to be dispersed to organizations in the community, the LGBT community in Minato Ward, which is a section of Tokyo. But only those that support trans ideology need apply. The women at the Rape Center are left out. Save Women's Spaces is fortunate to work with a lawyer, Taro Takimoto, who has truly truly has Japanese women's interest at heart. He's fighting to defeat the LGBT bill, and his office is also used by Save Women's Spaces. Okay, the next thing is the Japanese government. Very simple explanation. The Japanese government is made up of one big party, which is usually the ruling party, and the other small parties or opposition parties. The big party is called the Liberal Democratic Party, but it is anything but liberal. They are very conservative. They are against LGBT rights, including same-sex marriage and gender self-ID. The other parties are for same-sex marriage and gender self-ID. In most places in Japan, LGBTQ+ is a package. It's either all or nothing, except that there's one thing that's different in Japan. A transgender person must go through therapy and operations to render themselves sterile before they can change their registration and present as the opposite sex. This the ruling party approves of. With this law in place, the number of people in Japan who are recognized as the opposite sex was around 10,000 as of 2020. With the sterilization law, the possibility of trans ID females giving birth is avoided, and the prospect of parents trying to be named as the opposite sex parent is also prevented. That doesn't take away the fact that there is a lot of suffering because of these mandatory surgeries. Especially, there are a lot of female to male transgender people, and those females have to have a hysterectomy. It's pretty rough. The rule, referred to as GID, Gender Identity Disorder and Special Cases Act, has been enforced for 20 years. It shows that in addition to basic prejudice toward LGBT people, the ruling party has known the dangers of self-ID for a long time. So that was the background, and now the G7 summit. With the upcoming G7 summit, there was considerable activism to get the LGBT bill passed. This bill was made 2 years ago when the Olympics happened, and it's extreme. It has gender self-ID. It has teaching in the schools. But the ruling party has never liked it. Three leading LGBT groups, Marriage for All Japan, the Japan Alliance for LGBT Legislation, and Human Rights Watch, formed a focus group before the G7 summit called Pride 7. On March 30th, Pride 7 held their own summit in Tokyo, a roundtable with representatives from government and embassies attended. An effort was made to gain acceptance for the LGBT bill. One guest speaker from the ruling party said that the Diet was working hard for the enactment of the bill. Trans activists in Japan have also had some help from abroad. More than anyone, the American ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel, has been pushing for passage of the bill. He had the 6 other ambassadors from the G7 to sign a joint private letter to the Japanese Prime Minister, citing the lack of LGBT rights. He spent a lot of time at events such as Pride Parade and Pride 7 Summit with Prime Minister Kishida's aide, who is thoroughly behind the bill. On Twitter, he had this to say: "The equality countdown begins now. It's time for a new era where members of the LGBTQI+ feel at home in Japan and America, and we support universal human rights for all." Meanwhile, where this is going on, the ruling party was revising the LGBT bill. Where it said end discrimination, they changed it to end unjust discrimination. And gender self-ID was changed back to the way they have it, the GID requiring surgeries. And finally, the clause involving LGBT education in schools was removed. They felt that if the bill without revision was passed, there would be problems with men accessing women's restrooms and public baths. So this is one thing where Japan is different, the public baths. Like in Tokyo, there's a lot they're called osento, like mom and pop small bathhouses. And so they're afraid that men will go into them. One prominent conservative politician said that it's wrong to protect a minority at the expense of the majority. And I think he meant women by that. They seem to have an idea of what would happen if they passed full LGBT rights. So then the summit is coming up as of May 16, 3 days before the G7. The ruling party and the second largest party, Komeito, agreed on a revised LGBT bill. And this was on the revised bill. And this was presented to the Diet on May 18th. As the smaller parties were unhappy with this bill, now revised, they refused to deliberate and vote on it. So in the end, the bill was presented and then shelved. The ruling party felt satisfied that they had done just enough to appease the other countries in the G7. But of course, the LGBT community and allies were not happy with this outcome. On the other hand, the ruling party had many emails and phone calls from angry constituents decrying the bill. Because of Japan's conservative nature, gender ID may not take root here, even with all the outside pressure. So, what did Rahm Emanuel have to say about the outcome of the LGBT bill? After his overly optimistic messages on Twitter, he had this to say: today's introduction of an LGBTQI+ awareness bill is a significant step in a long journey for equity for all. I thank the Japanese public for supporting equality and seeking change. It's unclear to me what he's happy about, as the bill was not deliberated, voted on, or passed. Perhaps he's just being strategic as the ambassador, waiting for his next chance. This time, women in Japan have been spared gender self-ID. On the other hand, gays and lesbians and bisexuals have been denied same-sex marriage. The Diet will continue to discuss the bill until the end of the session, which is June 21st. After the G7, one of the small parties, the Democratic Party for the People, considered changing the bill to protect cisgender people. They're getting there. Probably nothing will come of this, but it shows that lawmakers are beginning to wake up to the harms of gender self-ID. This and the conservative nature of Japanese lawmakers means that the LGBT bill will remain on the shelf for a long time to come. Okay, I have some updates from today. I have a source in Tokyo that sent me some updates. On June 16, the Supreme Court of Japan will hand down a judgment as to whether a trans-identified male can use the women's toilets in the government building where he's employed. The previous judgments have been split. This is fantastic. This woman has come out of nowhere. Suddenly she was at the train stations handing out leaflets, and she has a megaphone and she's making speeches. Her name is Moe Fukada, and her mission is to protect women's toilets. She's organizing an all-women's conference, and there's an ad right here is at the bottom. That's the ad for the conference. On June 3rd, because of her and others, there are many concerns about the LGBT bill in various publications. So people are waking up here. I would like to thank a woman in Tokyo for helping me do this. It really, her effort really helped me. And she's an awesome activist who can assemble information at the speed of light. Okay, that's all.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to see a video from Shono Yoriko. And then after that, we're going to hear from Uno Ishigami, who's the Japanese country contact for WDI. So Shono Yoriko is a historic figure in the world of Japanese literature, whose work has been translated into multiple languages. She has won several famous awards for Japanese literary fiction, including the Akutagawa Award. And the title of this talk is Cancel Culture in Japan Afflicts the Novelist Shono Yoriko. So thank you so much for this recording, Shono Yoriko.
はじめまして、生野より子です。WDI の皆様、 この度は世界に向かって世界の共通言語で私に対する連帯を表明してくださってありがとうございます。そればかりではなく、この連帯の契機になりました生野頼子発禁小説集を、あなた方のサイトで、に書影を載せていただき、検証していただき、ご紹介いただいたことを心より感謝しております。この小説は、日本文学者として初めてトランスジェンダリズムの危機を訴える内容を含んだものとなっております。伺いますれば、2004年、イギリス、本部のあるイギリスでは、トランスジェンダリズムですね、トランスジェンダリズム、ジェンダー原理主義の危機が迫り、それ以後、イギリスの婦人たちは、あるいは世界各地の婦人たちは、言うに言われぬ苦労を続けてこられました。今、やっと夜明けであっても、今後もどのような揺り返しや困難が続くか分かりませんね。しかし、でもね、今ではイギリス全体が良くなってきたんですね。女子トイレの修復が公約になって実行されたり、女子スポーツに理解が示されたり、とうとう例のタビストクジェンダークリニックが閉鎖になりましたね。日本のことを考えてみますと、過去にもね、世界中でサリドマイド事件があった。日本は薬害エイズ事件というのがありました。いずれも恐ろしい医療過誤ですけれども、しかし今回はそれが反差別、子どもの人権を守るという美名のもとに行われたということで、決して日本には上陸させてはならないと思っております。何としてもこのような悲劇は防がねばなりません。っていうものというのもですね、実は昨年前半に日本では LGBT 理解増進法というその名ばかり、そう称するだけであって、その実態はまさにジェンダー原理主義の方に過ぎないという方が、オリンピックレガシーと、それからやはり反差別の美名のもとに、国会上程されようとしたんですね。しかも、学術ですね、学者さんやその有名フェミニストの大半がこの法案に賛成していました。ラディカルフェミニストはもちろん反対したんですけど、日本ではリベラルフェミニスト、クイアフェミニストが圧倒的優位なんですね、この国では。人数もですけど、大学の先生とか、あるいはマスコミに出てる人、大手出版社から次々本を出しているような人は、ほぼリベラルフェミニズムとクイアフェミニズムです。この人々の多くが、中には前世紀からですね、有名な人で、売春合法化を肯定していたような人がいました。なお、マスコミにはその時点で言論統制がきっちりかかってました。ジェンダー原理主義者にとって都合悪いことはすべてヘイトスピーチ、あるいは弱者を傷つけるなどの名のもとに報道されませんでした。女性スペースに関してもですね、日本では女子大生に混浴をさせる、女子トイレをなくす等をですね、当然とする女子大の大物女性教授が今も優勢です。しかしそんな中で、差別をやめろという集団デモに抵抗して、一部の保守議員と市政の女性たちが協力し、この国会上程を阻止しました。なので、現在このジェンダー原理主義に基づく国法はありません。しかし、自治体において、東京や埼玉などでこうしたジェンダー原理主義を旨とする地方条例が成立してしまいました。埼玉などはですね、4000件を超えるパブリックコメントが寄せられて、その 87% が反対しているんですけれども、また当事者たちから反対の声が上がってるんですね。それでも強行されました。なので、イギリスは、夜明けでもこっちはまだ油断できません。とはいうものの今、このジェンダー原理主義との戦いにおいて、日本には一つ 有利なことがあります。それは、この時代に逆行した思想の根本にあるゲイフォビアですね。日本の歴史において西洋ほど深刻ではないということです。で、一方、その欧米のジェンダー原理主義というのは、所詮、そのゲイという事実に対する否認を含んでますからね、否認でできていると。で、それと同時に、現実そのものなはずの女性の体ですね、女性の身体の軽視、それから侮辱というものをエンジンにしてますね。これが支持される理由でしょう。で、日本は日本はっていうと、でもだけど男尊女卑ですよ。そして、痴漢という言葉で有名になっています。それから性暴力ビデオのひどい国です。ひどいのがあるそうです。その一方で、ゲイ、女装、男装には比較的寛容です。だって、ゲイや女装や男装って何にも悪いことじゃないし、誰にも迷惑かけないですもん。ね。それで、勲章を受ける女方、女装、歌舞伎の女方は勲章をもらったりしています。それから70年代からテレビでは女装タレントがすでに大人気でした。もうテレビの伝統になってます。日本においてはですね、多数派っていうのが仏教徒なんですね。つまり、その宗教由来のゲイフォビアがない。で、肉体を非常に重要視します。で、肉体を超えられるのは、ブッダなどの偉大な存在だけと。例えば、仏になるっていうか、肉体を超えるのに日本ではどうするか。昔の話ですけれども、生きたままご飯を食べなくして、すごい修行をして、ミイラになるんです。即身仏と言います。こういうようなことが、肉体を超える手段、ね、魂だけになる。そういうわけで、現代の日本人はそんなことしませんけど、でも、やっぱり死ぬと、キリスト教徒よりは、お骨とか、遺骨とかですね、遺骸、その残った物質を尊重するんですね。で、その一方だから、現代人が肉体と分離できる魂の性別なんて、なかなかピンとこないですよ。日本においてですね、ジェンダー原理主義とは、ただの外国かぶれであり、一般の人々にとってはあまりピンとこない考えだということですね。カルトに染まろうにも、宗教的な根本が違うということです。とはいえ、怖いことに、この外国かぶれはマスコミや学術、つまりエリート階層に固まっているんですね。なので、このジェンダー原理主義が海外においてすでに非現実的かつ民意に沿わないと判明してしまった今でも、日本のマスコミはこれを隠していて、最先端の世界基準であるかのように振る舞っています。新世紀になってから日本の表現の自由は、昔はすごかったんですね。結構あったんですけど、日本の表現の自由はすごい速度で変化し続けています。そんな中、日本ではジェンダー原理主義に基づく表記により、男を女などと記述した新聞記事が出たり、性別記載なしで議員候補者の一覧が出て、報道に欠落がある状態になっています。女の人が誰に投票していいかわからない。その他に憂いべきこととして、国保もないまま地方条例だけで警察が動きにくくなるような事態もあり、教育現場でも医学的真実に基づかない子どもには理解しがたい教育が始まりつつあります。そんな状況で、この発禁小説集を刊行するために私は苦労してきました。でも、やはりそれは皆さんのお力で助けてもらってということです。市政の人々がリンクを貼り、ツイートをし、この文も校閲をしてくださる人がいました。だから、多くの人々の連帯でできた本です。版元も含めて、版元が一番。でも思えば、このジェンダー原理主義批判の入った小説を、私は実はこれ以前の2006年にもう書いてたんですね。それは近未来ディストピア。その中に、実は今問題になっている売春の合法化ですね。しかも少女なんですね、作中では。自分をあるいはその少女だと信じた少女自認だけで女湯や女子トイレに入れる男性を書いています。しかし、その時代設定がですね、2060年でした。思いっきりその悪夢的に書いたつもりなんですけど、同じことが こんな早く来るなんてね。まさかこんな時代が早く来ると思ってもみず、抵抗運動を始めたのはほんの3、4年前です。最初の頃などはLGBT 運動がですね、ジェンダー原理主義に乗っ取られたものだと知らないで、むしろその気の毒な弱者の集団と思ってました。従来の運動だと思ってたんですね。しかし、実際はというと、日本の性的少数者の中には、この運動に反対している人がいっぱいいますよ。で、思えばこれは腐敗してしまった新世紀の左翼のエセ運動なのですね。なお、最近、性的少数者に、保守派が多いということを知って私は驚いています。考えてみたら同性婚っていうけど、結婚なんだから保守的ですよね。しかし私や左翼の女性たちは、それ以前から共産党を信用していたので、まずいことにですね、共産党の方への請願をしばしば行ってましたね。赤旗寄稿者だった私は、共産党から嘘をつかれて、手のひら返しをされ、切り捨てられました。私と同じようにして声を上げていた女性たちは、野党支持者を自称するネットの人々から、おバカと、野ぐそをさせろと女子トイレが嫌なら、顔に入れ墨しろ、収容所に入れろなどと言われて、中には職場に来られたりした人もいるようで、これは大変困ったと思います。また私は作家なもんですから名前が出てますし、書店に本を置くなと、これはすごくしつこいです。ショーノの本を捨てろ、人間ではない、頭がおかしい、デマ、ヘーター、フォビアなど言われて、猫までヘイト作家の猫と言われて、版元にも書店にも雑誌にも、大半のところに一つだけを除いて嫌がらせが来ました。嫌がらせが来なかったのはこの本を出したところだけです。この私へのキャンセルや左翼女性たちが追い散らされるのも、やがてこれが世界修正なんだと気づきました。思えばこの白金小説集には男尊左翼という言葉が出てきます。書いた当時は日本特有の現象だと思い込んでいましたけど、しかし世界現象でした。日本の左翼政党においては、女性議員さえも例外ではありません。むしろ先頭に立って、このジェンダー原理主義を進めようとするんですね。例えば、メール一本で性別が変えられると、社民党の女性党首が平気で言うんですね。私が最初共産党に情報を届けようとしたのは、党の機関紙にこの件を載せて報道してくれるだろうという期待があったからです。しかし、いつしかこうなったら文学で報道するしかないという気持ちになりました。これは今までに他の問題、TPP 批判などで行ってきたものなので慣れていました。小説の中に危機を訴える情報を書き込むんですね。しかし、すでに報道規制が行われている状態では、信じてもらえないばかりか、差別的だとも言われて、長編2つが没となり、次第に貧乏になってきました。可愛がってくれた親戚のおばちゃんからもらった貴金属や時計を売り、質屋通い、またカードでやりくりをしながら生き延びました。そんな中、ある日ふとこの貧乏を書いてみようと思いつきました。すると、書いている時もまた自分で読んでみても面白いんですね。担当者は喜んで掲載してくれました。日本では落語でも詩小説でも貧乏話というのは人気があります。この7や7回ワクチン2回という作品を従来の読者もラディカルフェミニストも大変喜びました。また、ありがたいことに貧乏になった理由や背景としてなら少しはジェンダー原理主義の危険性について書くことを許されたんですね。そこで作中に WDI の旧称である WHRC の名前を出し、紹介することもできたんです。でも、結局はそこで終わりでした。ご存知のように、私は WDI の会員ではありません。最初に初めましてとご挨拶したように、今が出会いです。初めてですね。しかし、このあなた方の名前を見とがめて、文芸誌の評論欄で私を不当糾弾する評論家が出てきたのですね。私はいわゆる純文学雑誌で仕事をし、本を出して生計を立てています。そこの雑誌はすでにインクルーシブフェミニズムを標榜し、 私にはどんな依頼もなくなっていました。そんな私が自分の出身雑誌でやっと発表した貧乏話を、そのインクルーシブ文芸誌で重用されているというかな、よく登場するようになったある若い評論家が糾弾してきたのです。本人のプロフィールには she、her と書いてあります。今まで見たことのない名前でした。でも、ズブの素人新人だって表現は自由ですよ。別に出来が悪いと批判するだけなら、立派な意見です。大丈夫です。しかし、持っている主義主張のゆえに禁止しようとした。そもそも私の主張はヘイトでも何でもないです。ただ事実です。ただの事実を言ってるだけ。なのに、これではまるで大敗芸術扱いです。っていうのも、相手はジェンダー原理主義批判の理論や事実誤認ではなくてですね、そういうちゃんと論争するんならいいですけど、ただ WDI の急所を主に見とがめて、一番いかんのはそこらしいんですよ。ここが生物学的性別を主張するからヘイト団体だと言ってきたわけです。私の小説はそれ自体が優れていても認めるべきではないと。当時の私は、物書きだけの、2000人ほどの団体ですね。日本文芸家協会の会報に、1000字ほどの短いエッセイを発表しました。国内で報道されない国内の事件、そして JKR の十何頭の海外の事件をそこにまとめ、影響力のある書き手たちに届けようという質問、意図がありました。女という言葉が消されるのを危惧し、女性文学は白金文学なのかという題名をつけました。すると、この評論家はそのエッセイを読みもしないうちにネットで、まだトランス差別と内容を一切知らぬのに糾弾してきたんですね。なおかつ文芸誌ではそのエッセイを読んだと称していましたが、ヘイト呼ばわりし、題名も内容も一切紹介しませんでした。私はその糾弾掲載誌に、行動なき処刑と題した短い反論を載せようとしたけれど、断られました。理由はメールをもらってます。女子刑務所における女囚たちの悲劇について書いてあったこと等も理由にされていました。この評論家はまた、その糾弾の中で私に反省のために、あるハイデガー研究者というか、ハイデガーの本を書いているトランス女性が書いたエッセイを読めと命じてきました。ハイデガーはご存知のように、哲学者第一のナチス協力者です。つまり、その研究をしている人間は許しておくんですね。一方、ただ、あなた方の組織の名を書いた程度で、その書き手を内容も存在も抹殺しようとするというわけです。こうして、その年の年末に、いつの間にか私の7や7回ワクチン2回という作品は、このようなご主張のある作品、主張です、思想信条と呼ばれ、やっと掲載できたその雑誌の版元から刊行できなくなりました。普通刊行しようと思って雑誌に載せるんですね。よそへ持っていくと怒るんですけどね。そこからデビューして私は、40年書いてた雑誌です。いろいろありましたけど、今まででもとうとう書けなくなりました。そもそも気がつくと、古巣であったはずのその雑誌は、すでにその活動家をも含む、ジェンダー原理主義者たちの舞台になっていました。かなりの分量で掲載されていて、私を糾弾していた若い女性の書き手もいつの間にか登場していました。なお、その後私がこの版元から出していた本を、他社から文庫化しようとしてというか、珍しくオファーがあったんですね。それで私を追放した人物の一人に出版の報告だけをしました。縁が切れてるんだから。すると急にその文庫はうちが出したいって言ってきたんですね。それで、だったらまず私に謝罪した上で、今まで書いていた雑誌に復帰させてくださいと言ってみたところ、それならばよそで出してくださいと言われて、そのままになりました。受賞して売れた本です。このような事情で、この白金小説、7や7回、ワクチン2回を含み、さらにそのジェンダー原理主義の危険性について書き足した 発禁小説集は、出すとこがあったんです。長英社という、素晴らしく勇気のある、小出版社、地方の長野県の小出版社から出ることになりました。帯にも本体にも憲法21条、日本が誇る平和憲法の表現の自由と何よりも結社の自由を謳ったものです。これが、帯にも本体にもですよ、図書館から撤去されないよう、表現の自由を掲げました。この長英社は、ネットではジェンダー原理主義者たちからヘイト出版社と言われていても、直接の苦情とは全く来ず、手紙とか Amazon レビューでですね、むしろ少数とはいえ、深い感謝と声援に包まれていますね。またこの本は日本中の大型書店に、現在普通に置かれています。ヘイト本を平積みにしないことで、有名な本屋でも平積みにしております。無論、例のジェンダー原理主義者たちは邪魔をしに来たんですね。例えば、書店の新刊紹介ツイッターに絡んで、だから、ちょっと遠慮しろというようなことを言ってきた。にもかかわらず、本はそのまま置かれて、その週、この時、絡まれた大型書店のベストセラー7位に入って、これは純文学の本では珍しいことです。大ベストセラーの人たちと並んでるわけですからね。で、1週間で重版が決まりました。で、これはやはりその真実の報道を愛する、そしてどんなに差別されても自分が女性だという現実から目を背けない方たちの、声援のお力だと感謝しております。またこの本の反響に関してですが、最初新聞の反応はですね、大手3社が黙殺でしたね。朝日、毎日、読売、あとは極右系のですね、産経なども、黙殺してます、今も。で、これはやっぱり痛手ではあります。しかし、朝日はですね、この本の雑誌掲載時に朝日から絶賛された短編も入ってるんですけど、知らん顔してますね。そんな中で東京新聞の文芸コラムが反応してくれました。作品の詩小説性を称賛しつつも、その女性スペースの危機について知らせてくれたんですね。書いてくれたんです。新聞にですよ。で、この東京新聞というところは、非常にリベラルなところです。どっちかというと左ですね。で、ただし、同じ文芸コラムにですね、その後、それに対する、反論が出ました。でも、その反論は非常に、感情的だったために、むしろジェンダー原理主義の問題点を報道する結果となってくれました。やがて、北海道新聞という、これも大きい地方新聞です。ジェンダーという言葉を使って、私が、辛い目に遭っているという、そういう、紹介を、丁寧で完璧な書評が出ました。さらには、週刊新潮という、これも非常に、週刊新潮社自体は、保守です。右ですね。ここが、の文芸コラムに、週刊新潮の文芸コラムに、私がキャンセルされたことを報道して、言論の自由を売れる報道が出ました。記事が出ました。それはそれを書いたのはでも私の長年の論的で今も対立点のある人なんですね。にもかかわらず彼は表現の自由を訴えて、報道してくれたんです。婦人雑誌は大体リベラルフェミとクイアフェミの牙城なんですけど、やはりその小説家の方がこの貧乏小説っていうことの貧乏の小説の面白さという本質をついた書評を出してくれました。だから大きい表現の自由の大木は切り取られてる、倒れ伏してるわけですけど、その切り株から小さい芽が出てきた、その芽を出そうとしたジャーナリストたちがいたということですね。その後、トラス首相の誕生がありましたね、イギリスで。その時に東京新聞と毎日新聞がトラス氏が反ウォーク政策と、言葉はちょっと婉曲にしてますが、それで女性からの支持を得ているという報道が出ました。この問題がだからまさに大新聞で報道されるようになった、少しずつ解禁になっているという感触があります。とはいうものですね、結局私が長年仕事した雑誌から 完全に追放されていることは変わりません。マスコミと学術の堅くなさは相変わらずですし、それに従う分断の書き手は従っているわけですね。報道の自由なんて、憲法21条なんていらないんでしょうね。最近も私、日本の解説を以前に書いてもらって泣いて喜んだとか、対談ができて泣いて喜んだとか言っている若い作家が複数いて、その人たちを見てみたら、要するにそれは結局私のようなヘーター作家を、ヘーター呼ばわりしてるだけで、私は正直なだけです。ヘーター呼ばわりされている作家を今まで好きだったということを懺悔するという文脈の中で、昔読んだとか昔好きだったとか言ってるんですね。でも、それだったらもう全く、これでは中国とかのですね、昔の文化大革命と変わらないと思いましたね。だからこの人たちは書き手としての尊厳以前に、主語もないし、主観も主権もないんですよ。そう思いました。自分の主語を他人に奪われて何とも思ってないんです。言葉というものについて一切真面目に考えてないんです。そんな人たちに文学者の資格はありません。最後に申し上げますけど、この問題は女性の生存権の問題であるとともに、地球レベルでの現実認識の、特に言語と現実の関係の、特に主語の危機なんですね。人権というのはそもそも誰のものか、その所有者のものです。その所有者を示す主語の定義が変わってしまうんですよ。男は女である。ジェンダーの原理主義者たちはそう言ってるんですね。これで女の持っているものは全て男に奪い取られますね。また、水や空気のように基本的な女という言葉が変われば、文学ばかりか全ての法律や現実認識まで変わってしまいます。現実を表す言葉がなくなってしまうんですね。私たち女は今、女という国の領土を奪われ、国旗を焼かれ、歴史を滅ぼされ、従来の国語を禁じられようとしています。ですので、ここから私たちの権利の始まり、本当に最近、100年ぐらいのことでしょ、女の人たちが何か所有しているのって。女という主語を守らねばなりません。それはどのようなジャンルのどんな書き手にとっても、私と敵対する書き手や私と違うジャンルの書き手にとっても、またどのような男にとっても女にとっても大切な言葉です。なので、女性である自分の体と書き手である自分の生命を守るために、逮捕されるまで書くだけだと、この本の中にも私は述べました。最後に、一言、今、多くのメディアで禁じられ、私がこの語を使ったために、糾弾対象となったという、ある言葉を述べます。I stand with J.K. Rowling。ありがとうございました。これで終わります。
We're now going to hear from the Japanese country contact for WDI, Uno Ishigami, who will talk about follow-up to this. So over to you and welcome, Uno.
I'm Uno Ishigami, WDI Japanese contact. I'm here on behalf of Ms. Shono Yoriko. And the videos recorded last October, so let me add some information concerning current situation in Japan. As Barbara told us today, in Japan, a bill to advocate gender identity is about to be discussed in Diet this month or next, and is currently being met with great opposition by women and those who realize the danger of this bill, gravity of this issue. The situation is uncertain, but we are against this with all our might. I suppose the worst thing may happen. 2 years ago, this bill was stopped by women citizens, and conservative Diet members. The media control at that time has been lifted recently, and media is now gradually reporting on the reality of this issue. This time, however, the bill was submitted to the Diet. One of the main reasons for this was that the US ambassador to Japan and the ambassadors of a number of countries had interfered in internal affairs of Japan, as Barbara told us today. Making use of the G7 summit held in Hiroshima, Japan, there were unreasonable demand toward one sovereign country from home and abroad to make a law by the summit. Even if we are able to stop passing of this law this time, we cannot be relieved because there are moves to amend other existing law, the GID law, Barbara said, to pave the way for self-ID to be possible. Ms. Shono Yoriko hopes that her message will be heard in Japan and around the world, and the more people will know the situation in Japan, and it will be part of the force to stop the bill. Please keep your eyes on development regarding the bill in Japan. This is Shono Yoriko band novels, which she told on the video. And this one is her new book, Joniku Danshoku, which means male eat, female meat, in which she sharply criticized gender ideology. I'm soon going to write about this book and on WDI website on the page of Report from Japan. Thank you.